The Duke locked his wife out of the accounts room at 10 o'clock. At 11, the Crown arrived to seize the books. Lady Margaret stood beneath the gallery, while the chief auditor announced that Blackmere must prove how every pound of royal flood relief had been spent. Her husband's counsel insisted the estate was prosperous, the tenants satisfied, and the winter grain already secured. Sebastian believed them. His father's reckless speculation had nearly destroyed Blackmere, and he had rebuilt his life around one principle. Authority survived only when every person remained within an assigned boundary. Margaret's boundary did not include his ledgers, but she had spent the previous month visiting tenant farms. She had seen broken drainage gates, unpaid labourers, and children eating oats meant for horses. Then a porter carried in the official harvest records. A red wooden tally marked 40 wagon loads, delivered from Lower Fen. Margaret had crossed Lower Fen 2 days earlier. There was no harvested field there, only freshly turned earth and a row of empty milestones. The tally lay upon the silver salver like a drop of blood. Your Grace, Mr. Wycliffe, the chief auditor, held out a folded warrant bearing the Treasury's ribbon. We require the rent rolls, granary inventories, relief disbursements, and council minutes from March to the present day. Nothing is to leave this house. Sebastian accepted the warrant. He was a tall, severe man, whose composure had survived creditors, elections, and the death of a father who had left him a title balanced upon ruin. Only Margaret, after 18 months of marriage, could detect the small signs of strain, the stillness of his shoulders, the pressure of his thumb against the edge of the paper. "You shall have everything," he said. Lord Roland Fenwick stepped forward before anyone else could move. Sebastian's maternal uncle had presided over the estate council since the old Duke's final illness. Silver-haired and unfailingly courteous, he possessed the reassuring gravity of a man accustomed to being trusted. "Mr. Voss and I inspected the books only last week," Roland said. "Every expenditure is accounted for." Behind him, Caleb Voss, Blackmere's land agent, bowed. To the last shilling. Margaret looked again at the red tally. 40 wagon loads could not be mistaken for 4, nor could Lower Fen be mistaken for fertile ground. Its drainage embankment had failed in April, drowning the barley seedlings beneath black water. She had walked the perimeter with Mrs. Beatrice Cole, a tenant widow whose family had farmed there for 30 years. The mud had still reached Margaret's ankles. Sebastian turned toward the locked western corridor. His gaze found Margaret before he addressed the steward. "Open the accounts room." The irony was too sharp to require words. An hour earlier, before the same councilman now surrounding him, he had taken Margaret's key and declared that her interference threatened the orderly government of Blackmere. She had tried to show him a simple discrepancy. The acreage recorded as cultivated exceeded the estate's arable land by nearly 600 acres. He had not examined her notes. Roland had suggested that ladies accustomed to charitable visits often confused hardship with mismanagement, and Sebastian had ended the discussion. Now the steward inserted the key. It would not turn. A murmur moved through the hall. "The lock was changed this morning upon His Grace's order," Voss explained quickly. The locksmith provided 2 keys. "I possess one," Sebastian said. His voice had grown quiet. "Where is the other?" Voss touched his coat, then his waistcoat. His face arranged itself into confusion. It was placed in the council box. The council box was brought from the library. Inside lay sealing wax, memoranda, 2 quill knives, and an empty brass hook. Mr. Wycliffe signalled to the Crown officers. "Break the door!" Sebastian's jaw tightened as iron struck oak. Margaret watched Roland rather than the splintering panels. He did not appear frightened. He appeared inconvenienced. The door gave way on the 4th blow. Dust stirred in the narrow room beyond. Ledgers filled the shelves from floor to ceiling, each labelled in Voss's precise hand. Nothing appeared disturbed, until Mr. Wycliffe ordered the harvest book opened beside the corresponding granary register. The figures agreed perfectly. Lower Fen had produced 40 wagon loads. 40 had entered the northern granary. 40 had supposedly been distributed among flood-stricken tenants. Perfect accounts, Margaret's father had once told her, deserved greater suspicion than untidy ones. Land was never perfect. Rain fell unevenly. Carts broke axles. Grain spoiled. Human beings made corrections. Mr. Wycliffe ran one finger down the immaculate columns. We received information that the relief accounts had been manipulated. Sebastian looked at Margaret. The accusation in his eyes struck before he spoke. From whom? The petition was unsigned, the auditor replied, but it contained details known only to a member of this household. Margaret felt every face turned toward her. Roland's expression softened with practiced sympathy, as though her disgrace pained him. Voss stared at the floor. Sebastian said nothing, yet his silence placed her alone beneath the weight of their suspicion. She could defend herself and sound guilty, or remain silent and let them decide that silence was proof. Instead, she stepped toward the salver. "May I examine the tally?" Sebastian hesitated, then nodded. Margaret lifted the red marker by its cord. The wood was clean, its cut edges pale and fresh. Yet the inventory claimed it had been issued before the April flood. On the reverse, beneath the red paint, someone had carved a small Roman numeral, 7. She looked toward the shelves. The 7th harvest ledger was missing. Someone had manufactured false grain, summoned the Crown with an anonymous petition, and ensured Margaret was publicly deprived of access 1 hour before the auditors arrived. These were not separate humiliations or accidents. Her exclusion was part of the design, and whoever had designed it needed Sebastian to believe his wife had betrayed him. Margaret lowered the tally without releasing it. "I did not send the petition." Sebastian's expression remained unreadable. "Yet you recognized a false entry within moments, because Lower Fen produced no harvest. That does not explain how the petitioner knew which records the Crown should demand." "No," she replied. "It explains why someone might prefer you to suspect the person most capable of challenging them." Roland gave a regretful sigh. "This is neither the place nor the hour for marital grievances. The auditors require cooperation, not conjecture." Mr. Wycliffe extended his hand for the tally. Margaret surrendered it carefully. The auditor placed it inside a Crown document case, recorded its carved numeral, and locked the lid. At least it could no longer disappear as easily as the 7th ledger had. The examination continued in the accounts room. Sebastian admitted the auditors, Roland, Voss, and the estate solicitor. Margaret was excluded. Again, the damaged door remained open, allowing her to hear pages turning and men discussing figures she understood better than several of those permitted inside. When she stepped toward the threshold, Sebastian blocked her path. "I will speak with you privately. You have already judged me publicly." His face tightened. "An unsigned accusation containing private information arrives immediately after you challenge my counsel. What conclusion would you draw?" "I would begin with evidence. And until I possess it, you will rely upon fear." The words struck him. For an instant, anger gave way to something more wounded, but he recovered before the others noticed. "You will return to your apartments," he said. "You are not to enter the estate offices or question the staff while the Crown conducts its inquiry." Margaret looked beyond him to the shelves. A narrow gap marked the missing 7th ledger. Beside it stood 6 volumes bound in green calfskin, all recently dusted. The empty space alone held a grey line along the wood, suggesting the book had not been removed that morning, but had been absent for weeks. She could not prove it from the corridor. "Very well," she said. Sebastian seemed surprised by her compliance. That was useful. Men who expected resistance rarely noticed the direction of a retreat. Margaret crossed the great hall and climbed the eastern stairs, but she did not return to her apartments. The Duke had forbidden the estate offices, not the abandoned schoolroom above the old orangery. Blackmere's former Duchess had once used the chamber to teach her children geography. Its walls remained covered with faded county maps, while rolled surveys lay forgotten inside a cedar chest. Margaret had discovered the room soon after her marriage and made it her refuge. There, among cracked globes and the scent of dry paper, she kept copies of rainfall measurements, planting schedules, and notes gathered during visits to the farms. Her knowledge had not been acquired as a fashionable amusement. At 16, after her father's death, Margaret had watched creditors gather in her mother's drawing room. Their modest Hampshire estate possessed good soil, but terrible accounts. The steward had recorded expected harvests as though they were harvested grain, concealed spoiled stores, and borrowed against crops already pledged elsewhere. Margaret had spent 5 years learning acreage, seed ratios, drainage, cart capacity, and the uncomfortable art of asking labourers questions gentlemen considered beneath them. By 21, her mother's debts had been paid. She unrolled her copy of Blackmere's spring survey. A knock sounded against the warped door. Mrs. Beatrice Cole entered carrying a covered basket. The tenant widow was nearly 60, broad-shouldered, and entirely unimpressed by rank. She had first met Margaret beside a broken sluice gate, and had valued her ever since, not because she was a duchess, but because Margaret had removed her shoes and stepped into the mud to measure the damage herself. "They say crown men have come," Beatrice said. "They have. And Mr. Voss says every tenant must present rent arrears by Friday or surrender winter allotments." Margaret looked up sharply. "He issued that order today. This morning. My eldest has not been paid for 6 weeks' work on the Western Embankment. Without those wages, we cannot settle the rent." The relief grant had specifically allocated money for embankment labour. According to the official accounts, those wages had already been paid. Beatrice removed the basket cloth. Beneath it lay 12 small wooden tokens, each branded with Blackmere's sheaf emblem. The men were given these instead of coin. Mr. Voss said they could exchange them after the harvest. Margaret picked up one token. Its edge bore the same small Roman numeral carved into the red tally. 7. She could take the tokens directly to Mr. Wycliffe, but doing so would expose Beatrice before Margaret understood who controlled the false records. Voss could evict the widow before the auditors established anything. Margaret opened her desk and removed a velvet case containing the emerald bracelet her mother had given her upon her marriage. "Take this to Mr. Halbrook in the village," she said. "He will advance enough to cover the arrears of every labourer named on your list." Beatrice pushed the case back. "That belongs to you. So does the obligation. If the Duke learns you paid his workers from your own jewels, he may finally ask why I was required to." Beatrice's eyes softened, though her mouth remained stern. She accepted the bracelet only after Margaret wrote a note protecting the pawnbroker from any accusation of theft. When the widow had gone, Margaret compared the labour tokens with the old transport survey. The numeral 7 did not refer to a ledger volume. It marked a delivery district. Lower Fen, the northern granary, and the western embankment all belonged to District 7. She traced the road between them. According to the official inventory, 40 grain wagons had crossed the Lower Fen Bridge in May. According to the survey notes and Beatrice's testimony, that bridge had collapsed during the flood in April and had not been rebuilt. The false harvest was only one part of the lie. Someone had recorded hundreds of wagon journeys across a bridge that no longer existed. Then Margaret noticed a penciled line on the survey, a proposed private road leading from District 7 to an abandoned canal wharf beyond Blackmere's boundary. The road had never been authorised. Yet on the paper, it had already been given a name, Fenwick Passage. Margaret was still studying the penciled road when footsteps approached the schoolroom. She rolled the survey quickly, returned it to the cedar chest, and turned the small brass key just as Sebastian entered. His gaze moved from her ink-stained fingers to the locked chest. "I instructed you to return to your apartments. You forbade me from entering the estate offices and questioning the staff. I have done neither. You found a third path. I found an old map." Sebastian closed the door behind him. For the first time since the auditor's arrival, no councilman stood nearby to witness or influence him. Fatigue had begun to show beneath his composure. "Halbrook sent word that you pawned your mother's bracelet to pay labourers whose wages appear as settled in your accounts." His eyes hardened. "You acted without consulting me. I tried to consult you this morning. That does not grant you authority to pledge your jewels and interfere with rent collection. My bracelet was separate property. The people facing eviction could not wait for your pride to become less expensive." Sebastian flinched, but before he could answer, Mr. Wycliffe appeared at the open door. "Your Grace, the northern granary inventory cannot be verified. Mr. Voss claims moisture has altered the weight of the stored grain." Margaret rose. "How much grain remains?" "That is precisely the disagreement. The register records 2,040 sacks. We have counted 612. Counting sacks will tell you very little if some are only partly filled." Mr. Wycliffe studied her. "What would you propose?" "A volume measurement." Sebastian's refusal was immediate. "My wife is not part of this examination." "No," Margaret said. "She is merely the person who knows the dimensions of your granary." Silence followed. Mr. Wycliffe looked from husband to wife. "The Crown will hear any person capable of establishing the truth." Half an hour later, Margaret entered the northern granary with Sebastian, the auditors, Roland, Voss, and 2 Crown clerks. Dust floated through narrow shafts of afternoon light. Grain sacks had been stacked along the outer walls, forming impressive rows that concealed the center of the building. Voss gestured toward them. "As I explained, damp has reduced the weight. Damp grain swells before it rots," Margaret replied. "It does not vanish." Several clerks concealed smiles. Roland did not. Margaret asked the workers to remove the front row. Behind it, the orderly stacks became irregular. Some sacks were half full, others contained only husks. The actual grain occupied less than 1/4 of the floor. She paced the length and width, counted the sound sacks, and examined the brass bushel measure hanging beside the scales. Its rim bore a shallow horizontal groove. Someone had filed away nearly an inch of its depth, reducing every measured bushel, while allowing the register to record the full amount. Margaret handed the measure to Mr. Wycliffe. "Compare this with a Crown standard." A clerk fetched the official measure from the auditor's wagon. Water poured into the Blackmere vessel was then transferred into the Crown vessel. It filled only 4/5. Mr. Wycliffe's face became grave. Every 5 bushels purchased with royal money yielded only 4 bushels in this store, and the missing 5th could be sold elsewhere without disturbing the written totals, Margaret said. Using the granary dimensions, the surviving sacks, and the altered measure, she calculated the deficiency, while the clerks repeated every figure. The result was not a lady's intuition, or an accusation shaped by resentment. It was measurable. 1,384 sacks were missing. Sebastian stared at the final number. How long would such a removal require? With ordinary farm carts, at least 170 journeys, Margaret answered, unless the grain was never brought here at all. Roland rested both hands upon his cane. A remarkable performance. Lady Margaret appears to have anticipated every question the auditors might ask. The implication reached everyone. Voss seized it eagerly. Her Grace visited the district repeatedly, without authorization. She could have altered the measure herself. Sebastian turned toward him. "You are the custodian of this granary. My keys were available to the household." "Not to my wife," Sebastian said quietly. "I removed her access before the investigation." It was not an apology, but it was the first time he had used his own injustice as evidence in her defense. Roland's expression changed by scarcely a degree. "Then perhaps we should restrict all movement until responsibility is established. Rumors are already spreading through the village. If tenants believe Blackmere insolvent, panic will do more damage than missing grain." Mr. Wycliffe ordered the granary sealed. He placed the altered brass measure inside a crown sack, tied it with blue cord, and recorded that Margaret had discovered it in the presence of 7 witnesses. As they left, Margaret noticed pale dust upon the wheels of 2 carts standing behind the building. It was not the dark clay of Lower Fen, but white canal lime, found only along the abandoned wharf beyond the estate boundary. She crouched beside the nearest wheel. Wedged beneath its iron rim was a torn strip of tarred canvas, stamped with a merchant's device, a crown above 3 reeds. Voss reached for it. Margaret covered it with her gloved hand. Mr. Wycliffe should take custody. The auditor removed and sealed the canvas. One of the granary workers, an elderly carter named Amos Reed, watched with growing fear. When Roland turned away, Amos whispered to Margaret, "Those carts moved at night. I was told they carried drainage stone." "How many nights?" 7. The numeral on the labor tokens, the missing ledger, the unauthorized road. 7 nights of concealed transport. Before Margaret could ask where the carts had gone, Amos looked past her and fell silent. Across the yard, Voss stood watching them. That evening, an order was nailed to every tenant cottage, forbidding labourers from speaking to the Duchess of Blackmere. The missing grain had not resulted from careless management. Someone was actively protecting the route by which it had disappeared. By breakfast the following morning, Roland had transformed Margaret's discovery into an achievement of the estate council. A printed notice appeared in the servants' hall, declaring that a routine internal inspection had revealed irregular granary measurements before any permanent loss could occur. It praised Lord Roland's vigilance, assured the tenants that winter provisions remained secure, and made no mention of the Duchess or the 1,300 missing sacks. Sebastian entered breakfast holding the notice and forced Roland to admit that his supposed inspection had neither discovered the shortened brass measure nor calculated the missing grain. Before the auditors he corrected the record. "Then you discovered neither the method nor the loss." "My wife did." The first public acknowledgement of Margaret's competence was interrupted when estate constables brought Amos Reed into the room. Voss claimed 12 new sovereigns had been found beneath the carter's mattress. Margaret observed that the spotless purse and coins bore none of the tar, lime, harness grease, or grain dust that covered everything Amos handled. Mr. Wycliffe sealed the money and placed Amos under Crown protection. When Voss threatened to evict Amos's wife and daughter, Margaret invoked the terms of her marriage settlement and installed them as her personal guests in the East Gatehouse. Later, Sebastian admitted he had been wrong to dismiss her knowledge, but Margaret refused to treat one apology as repair for repeated public harm. That afternoon she found the schoolroom searched and the old survey bearing the words "Fenwick Passage, stolen." Below her window, servants prepared her carriage and trunks. The housekeeper said Roland had announced that Sebastian ordered Margaret to leave Blackmere before dawn. Either Sebastian's new respect had already failed, or someone had begun issuing commands in the Duke's name. Margaret confronted Roland in the courtyard just as Sebastian arrived and denied giving any order for her departure. Mr. Wycliffe ordered the carriage and luggage searched. One trunk belonged to Margaret. The other, although marked with her initials, had been taken from the west attic. Inside lay the missing seventh harvest ledger, her stolen survey, the anonymous Crown petition, bundles of labour tokens, 50 new sovereigns, and a memorandum listing 7 nocturnal grain journeys. The evidence was not merely incriminating, it was unnaturally complete. Voss then produced Margaret's emerald bracelet from beneath the lining. Roland suggested that Margaret had sent the petition and hidden the evidence out of misguided ambition. Sebastian wanted to believe her, but hesitated before the assembled household. Until Halbrook could be questioned, he confined Margaret to the West Guest Suite, with no visitors, correspondence, or access to estate property. She told him he was giving the conspirator exactly what they wanted. Under Crown supervision, Margaret examined the recovered seventh ledger. Its final page scheduled the entire Southern Winter Reserve for transfer to canal barges the following morning. At noon, Blackmere's credit would be suspended. Someone had arranged for the estate to collapse while the only person who understood its land sat locked inside a bedroom. Margaret rang, until a guard summoned Mr. Wycliffe and Sebastian. She showed them the scheduled transfer and demanded that officers inspect the southern granary. Sebastian unlocked her door and admitted before the Crown Auditor that he had confused caution with surrendering his judgment. They reached the granary at first light and found more than 30 wagons already gone. Voss had departed with them, and Roland had ridden to the abandoned canal wharf. A fallen oak blocked the official road, but white lime in the ruts showed that the wagons were using the newly built Fenwick Passage. From a rise above Lower Fen, Margaret saw the grain moving toward 3 waiting barges. Then the village flood bell rang. The conspirators had opened an old sluice to deepen the canal for the loaded barges, and water was pouring toward the cottages and mill. Local authorities argued over jurisdiction while the flood advanced. Using her copied drainage survey, Margaret proposed cutting the southern canal bank and diverting the water into an abandoned chalk quarry. The plan would save the village and strand the barges, but it would destroy Sebastian's restored deer park, oak plantation, and hunting lodge, the land securing Blackmere's last private loan. When a bank rider warned that credit would be suspended at noon, Sebastian tore the letter in half and ordered the bank cut. Before constables, tenants, and labourers, he declared that Margaret commanded the flood response with his full authority. She organised evacuations, reinforced the mill road, calculated the quarry capacity, and directed the breach. Sebastian joined the labourers with a measuring cord tied around his waist. 20 spades struck the bank. Water burst toward the quarry, but a section collapsed too soon, and Sebastian vanished into the rushing current. The measuring cord snapped taut around Margaret's hands. Sebastian was pinned beneath the churning surface rather than carried away. Margaret ordered Amos and 3 labourers to take the line and pull together from higher ground. Sebastian's shoulder broke the surface, and Amos dragged him clear. Blood ran from a cut above his right temple, but he could move his hands and feet. Margaret left him under guard and returned to command the breach. She adjusted the cut, reinforced its northern edge with brushwood and clay, and within 40 minutes the canal began to fall. Crown officers reached the towpath as the 3 grain barges settled into mud. The village cottages stood in shallow water rather than a deadly current. The mill survived. The deer park did not. Sebastian, his temple bandaged and one arm in a sling, told Margaret that she had saved them. She answered that the labourers had followed his authority, but he corrected her. They followed your judgment. The barges carried sacks, marked with Blackmere's sheaf, and traces of blue paint, identifying grain, bought with royal relief money. Their tarred covers bore the same crown and reeds device found beneath the cartwheel. Amos identified the vessels from the 7 night journeys. A frightened barge master named Pike revealed a compartment beneath the steering platform. Crown officers found an iron box containing wharf permits, canal company shares, and a preliminary mortgage agreement. Fenwick Mercantile Trust would settle Blackmere's emergency debts in exchange for District 7, the canal, quarry, and transport rights across Lower Fen. Pike stated that Roland had given Voss the instructions, but his testimony remained fragile because he was a captured smuggler. Beneath the ruined wharf shelter, Sebastian admitted that his father's ruin had taught him to mistake control for strength. Margaret told him that understanding his fear did not repair what he had done. He promised to repair it whether she forgave him or not. Then Roland appeared on the ridge, saw Crown officers carrying away the iron box, and galloped toward Blackmere. He would reach the house first. When they returned shortly before noon, the great hall was crowded with creditors, tenants, servants, and magistrates. A targeted fire had destroyed the council's share register, transport contracts, and correspondence with Fenwick Mercantile Trust. Voss had disappeared. Roland blamed Voss alone and described the mortgage as a lawful rescue. Pike, after receiving a secret note, withdrew his accusation. At noon, the county bank suspended Blackmere's credit. Roland offered to discharge the debt, pay workers, and supply winter grain if Sebastian transferred District 7, surrendered estate management to the council, and allowed Margaret to be taken into Crown custody. Sebastian refused before the entire hall. He admitted that he had dismissed Margaret's warnings, deprived her of access, and permitted her humiliation. He dissolved the council, removed Roland, and declared Margaret's authority equal to his own, even though the decision appeared certain to cost him Blackmere. Creditors petitioned for control, and Mr. Wycliffe warned that Margaret would be arrested the next morning unless stronger evidence emerged. Beatrice then returned Margaret's bracelet. Halbrook had released it to a gentleman who paid with 50 new sovereigns. Those coins and the 12 planted against Amos belonged to one consecutive sequence. Margaret reconsidered Roland's shifting claims and the council box's empty key hook. Whoever possessed the missing duplicate could remove the 7th ledger, plant evidence, and enter the office before the fire. She asked Wycliffe to convene a public examination, promising to make Roland choose a lie that proved he knew the key. Margaret divided the evidence among separate Crown custodians and placed Beatrice, Amos, Pike, Halbrook, and the bank records under protection. The next morning the great hall opened to everyone who had witnessed her disgrace. Roland portrayed her competence as ambition and her compassion as conspiracy. Margaret dismantled his account in stages. If his council's inspection found the shortened grain measure, he concealed fraud. If it did not, his claim of vigilance was false. Amos testified to 7 nights of transport. Beatrice produced the 7th labor tokens and named unpaid workers whose wages appeared as sovereigns. Margaret questioned Roland about the duplicate accounts room key. He claimed to have seen it and described its red cord, greater length, and 2 grooves, details Sebastian confirmed Roland could not have known unless Voss privately showed him the key. Roland thereby undermined his claim that Voss concealed the scheme. Margaret established the sequence of the missing ledger: false trunk, unauthorized carriage order, office fire, shortened measure, impossible harvest, collapsed bridge, secret passage, barges, and mortgage. When she asked about the unnamed trust, Roland accidentally called it my trust, contradicting his claim that he was merely an advisor. Halbrook authenticated the numbers of the sovereigns used to redeem Margaret's bracelet. They continued directly into the sequence found in her trunk and beneath Amos's mattress. All 62 coins came from a single withdrawal. The county bank's sealed cashier ledger showed that Lord Roland Fenwick, acting as managing trustee of Fenwick Mercantile Trust, had withdrawn them. Roland claimed the money was for legitimate estate expenses, but Margaret placed the sealed coin records beside the bank ledger. Mr. Wycliffe then produced the fire-blackened duplicate key, recovered from the damaged office lock. Its bow bore 2 grooves, and a fragment of red cord remained fused to its shaft. Margaret explained the complete conspiracy. Roland and Voss recorded imaginary harvests from flooded fields, used the shortened measure to conceal shrinking reserves, paid labourers with tokens while recording gold wages, and moved Crown Relief grain at night along Fenwick Passage to trust-controlled barges. The anonymous petition was timed to bring an audit Blackmere could not survive. Margaret's questions made her dangerous and useful, so Roland copied discrepancies she had raised and encouraged Sebastian to exclude her. When she proved the accounts false, Amos and Margaret were framed with money from Roland's withdrawal. The final transfer would empty Blackmere before its credit suspension, allowing Fenwick Mercantile Trust to acquire District 7, the quarry, road and canal rights cheaply. Opening the sluice deepened the canal for the barges while endangering the village. "The plan failed," Margaret said, "because you believed land was merely something written in an account. You invented grain beneath floodwater, wagon journeys across a collapsed bridge, and wages for men who still carried wooden tokens. Your numbers agreed with one another. They did not agree with Blackmere." Crown officers arrested Roland. Voss was captured 2 days later and revealed the hidden stores and trust nominees. Frozen trust assets restored the relief fund, paid every labourer, and compensated flood-damaged tenants. Amos was cleared and received a permanent tenancy. The bank lifted Blackmere's suspension. The drowned quarry and lower park became a permanent flood basin, protecting the village. 1 week later, Sebastian assembled the same household in the Great Hall. He admitted that he had confused authority with wisdom, ignored Margaret's evidence, restricted her liberty, and permitted her public humiliation. He issued written corrections to every creditor, magistrate, and neighbouring family. Privately, he gave Margaret 3 documents. One guaranteed her independent income and separate property. One established equal authority over Blackmere's finances, tenants, and land, and one allowed her to live separately, with full support, if she chose to leave. He did not demand forgiveness. Margaret asked for time. Over the following months, Sebastian proved his change through repeated action. He attended tenant meetings without overruling her, asked before commanding, and never again used rank to end disagreement. Margaret chose to remain because the work had become hers, and the marriage now held the possibility of equal partnership. Respect became trust, trust became warmth, and warmth, given room rather than demanded, became love. On the first morning of spring planting, Margaret sat inside the restored accounts room. 2 keys hung beside the open door. Sebastian stopped at the threshold. "May I come in?" Months earlier, he had locked that door and decided where his wife's boundary ended. Margaret handed him the Lower Fen accounts. "You may, but you will check the acreage before believing the harvest." Sebastian took the papers and sat beside her. This time, the door remained open,